My father was popping champagne in Bali while I delivered my mother's eulogy. He posted the video with the caption, "Life is for the living," but that night, a text from my dead mother's phone would reveal his celebration was premature, and that the woman he'd supposedly killed was now the one coming for his entire empire. This is a story of betrayal, a fake death, and the dangerous evidence we uncovered to bring a powerful man to justice. The relentless Seattle rain felt appropriate, as if the sky itself was mourning the profound injustice of the day. I stood under a black umbrella, my wife Clara's hand a fragile, trembling anchor in mine. Our 6-year-old daughter Lily clutched my leg, her small face a mask of confusion beneath the hood of her little black coat. Before us lay an elegant oak casket, supposedly holding my mother, Isabella. The priest's solemn words blurred into the rhythmic drumming of the downpour, but the empty chair beside me screamed louder than any eulogy. It was my father's chair. Robert Vance, the grieving widower, was conspicuously absent. While we gathered in sorrow, his Instagram feed showed a sun-drenched video of him on a Balinese beach, laughing, a glass of champagne in one hand and his much younger mistress, Vanessa, tucked under his other arm. The caption, "Life is for the living," was a gut punch I felt all the way to my soul. What none of the mourners knew, what I wouldn't discover until the terrifying hours after the funeral, was that my mother wasn't in that casket. She was alive, hiding in a nondescript safe house across the city, meticulously compiling the evidence that would eventually see my father convicted for fraud, money laundering, and the murders he thought he had buried 2 decades ago. My name is Elias Vance at 34. My life in a quiet Seattle suburb was a picture of curated normalcy. I ran my own architecture firm, Green Line Designs, specializing in sustainable, eco-friendly homes. My wife, Clara, was an art therapist whose calm presence could soothe any storm. Our daughter, Lily, was a bright first grader with her grandmother's curious eyes. We lived in a beautiful glass and cedar house overlooking Lake Washington, a home my mother had helped us design and landscape herself. But beneath this polished surface of success and happiness ran deep, seismic cracks, all originating from the imposing figure of my father, Robert Vance. To the world, Robert Vance was a visionary, a titan of Seattle real estate. His company, Vance Properties, had stamped its name on half the city's skyline. He rubbed shoulders with senators and tech CEOs, always immaculate in a Brioni suit, his smile a calculated tool. But to me, he was the man who had never once attended one of Lily's dance recitals, who dismissed my passion for sustainable architecture as boutique nonsense for hippies, and who had pulled me aside at my own wedding to coldly inform me that Clara, despite her kindness and intelligence, came from unimpressive stock. My mother, Isabella, was his polar opposite. A retired botanist, she found profound wonder in the quiet miracles of nature, the intricate symmetry of a fern, the resilient life of a seedling pushing through concrete. She had been my sanctuary throughout a childhood spent trying and failing to earn my father's approval. "Eli," she would whisper, her hands covered in soil from her beloved garden, "don't ever shrink yourself to fit the cold. Empty spaces your father values. Build your own rooms, fill them with light and love." Her sudden death, from what doctors called a catastrophic and unpredictable aneurysm, defied all logic. Just 72 hours earlier, she'd been at our family dinner table, vibrant and healthy, laughing as Lily showed off a crayon drawing of our family, which pointedly included the goldfish but excluded my father. The call from Seattle General Hospital had come in the middle of a project review. A nurse's voice, thin with practiced sympathy, delivered the news that shattered my world. The drive to the hospital was a nightmarish blur of rain-smeared traffic lights and the creeping numbness that started in my chest and threatened to swallow me whole. In the sterile, antiseptic-scented waiting room, I found my father. He stood perfectly composed, examining a painting on the wall as if assessing its value. His explanation for my mother's death was delivered with chilling detachment. "These things happen, Elias. The human body is a fragile machine. It fails." When I, voice cracking, asked how he could be so calm, he looked at me with something akin to pity. "Grief is a private indulgence," he stated. Your mother would have expected strength. The burden of funeral arrangements fell entirely on my shoulders. My father claimed that a time-sensitive, nine-figure deal in Indonesia demanded his immediate presence. I later discovered this deal involved frantic transfers to numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands. I chose the casket, selected her favorite white daisies, and wrote an obituary that felt like a pale ghost of her vibrant life. Through it all, a single, relentless question echoed in the hollows of my mind. How could a woman so full of life be erased from the world so abruptly with no warning? The funeral service itself was a study in painful contrasts. The church was overflowing with my mother's people, former botany students whose lives she'd inspired, friends from the community garden she nurtured, neighbors she'd comforted during their own hard times. Their grief was raw and real. Yet the family pew was a cavern of absence, occupied only by me, my small family, and my mother's elderly, heartbroken sister. My father's empty seat was a silent, screaming testament to his monumental selfishness. That night, back in the suffocating silence of our home, I found myself scrolling through my father's social media feed. It was a masochistic exercise. Photo after photo documented his new beginning, him on a luxury yacht, toasting a sunset. Him and Vanessa laughing over a plate of exotic food. Him looking tanned and triumphant. Each image was a fresh betrayal, a deliberate desecration of my mother's memory. Then at 2:17 a.m., as I sat in the dark living room clutching one of my mother's favorite gardening books, my phone screen blazed to life. The notification was a text message. It was from my mother's number, the same number I'd called a dozen times, just to hear her voice on the voicemail one more time. My blood ran cold. The message was brief and impossible. I'm alive. The grave is empty. Come to the cemetery alone. Tell no one. Not even Clara. My first thought was that this was a cruel, sick joke orchestrated by my father. My second was that my grief had finally fractured my sanity, conjuring ghosts from the digital ether. But when my trembling fingers dialed the number and it rang through to her familiar, gentle voicemail greeting, "You've reached Isabella. I'm probably in the garden. Leave a message and I'll call you back." A primal, undeniable instinct overrode all logic and fear. I told Clara I was overwhelmed, that I needed to drive and clear my head. The concern in her eyes was a knife twist of guilt, but I couldn't risk telling her the truth. The drive to the cemetery was a journey through a nightmare. A thick, ghostly fog had rolled in from the sound, swallowing the streetlights, and the rain had intensified, my wipers struggling to keep pace with the storm. My heart hammered a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. The cemetery gates were eerily open. I parked and walked, my flashlight beam a weak, jittery saber cutting through the oppressive gloom. I approached the fresh mound of earth, my shoes sinking into the mud. And then I saw her, a silhouette, frail and shivering, standing exactly where her headstone would soon be placed. "Mom?" I whispered, the word tearing from my throat. She turned, and the beam of my light caught her face. It was gaunt and etched with deep lines of fear and exhaustion. But it was undeniably her, alive, breathing, real. We crashed into each other's arms there in the pouring rain, both of us sobbing, our bodies trembling with a mixture of shock, relief, and terror. For a long moment we just held each other, the world reduced to the sound of the storm and the miracle of her heartbeat against my chest. Finally she pulled back, her cold, thin hands gripping my arms as if to convince herself I was solid. "I'm so sorry, Eli," she said, her voice raw and raspy. "I had to make you believe it. I had to make everyone believe I was gone." She led me to a dented 10-year-old sedan parked on a side street, and we drove in heavy silence to a small, drab apartment in a neighborhood I rarely visited. The place was a Shella fold-out bed, a small table with 2 chairs, heavy curtains drawn tight against the world. This was where my mother had been living as a ghost for the past week, while the city mourned her passing. Over cups of bitter tea that grew cold in our hands, her incredible story poured out. It had started nearly 8 months ago, she explained, when she'd stumbled upon irregularities in their joint financial statements. She discovered my father was not just having an affair. He was systematically embezzling millions, funneling money through a labyrinth of shell companies. When she confronted him, his reaction was not denial, but a cold, calculated threat. He gave me two choices, she said, her hands shaking so badly the tea sloshed in her cup. I could sign over my entire inheritance, my shares in the company, the properties my parents left me, everything, and disappear quietly, or I could have a fatal accident. At first, she thought he was bluffing, trying to intimidate her. Then the accidents started. The brakes on her Volvo failed as she drove down the steep hill from their house. She found a section of the railing on her second-story balcony deliberately weakened. One night, she woke to see a dark figure standing in her bedroom doorway, who vanished when she screamed. Terrified, she went to the police. But my father's influence in Seattle was insidious and far-reaching. The detective who took her statement was polite but dismissive, later telling her privately that pursuing charges against a man like Robert Vance was a sure way to ruin your life. That's when she knew the system couldn't protect her. She had to become a ghost to survive. An old college friend, Martha, now a senior administrator at Seattle General Hospital, became her lifeline. Together, they devised an audacious plan. On the morning of her death, my mother went to the ER complaining of severe chest pains. In the controlled chaos of the examination room, Martha helped her switch places with a high-fidelity medical mannequin that was scheduled for transport to the pathology department. Our loyal housekeeper, finding my mother collapsed in the rose garden, called 911 as rehearsed. By the time the paramedics arrived, my mother was already being smuggled out a service entrance in a laundry cart, her heart pounding not from cardiac arrest, but from sheer terror. The most agonizing part, she told me, fresh tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face, was knowing the pain you would endure. Standing at that graveside, thinking I was gone forever. It haunts me, Eli, but if I had told you, and your father had sensed your knowledge, he would have killed us both without a second thought. The look in her eyes, a mixture of steel, resolve, and profound trauma eased any lingering doubt. My father wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was a predator. That night marked the beginning of the most dangerous double life I could ever imagine. By day I was Elias Vance, the grieving son, managing my firm, comforting my family, and even having strained, performative phone calls with my father about the estate. I had to master the art of lying to my wife, to my friends, to everyone I loved. By night I became my mother's partner in the clandestine war, a digital ghost hunter gathering the evidence to destroy the man who had terrorized her. We started with the documents she had already risked her life to collect, secretly copied financial records, encrypted emails showing the money trails, and audio recordings of his threats, captured on a tiny device she kept hidden in a potted plant. But it wasn't enough. We needed irrefutable physical proof, something that would compel federal authorities to look past my father's influence and wealth. That meant I had to break into the lion's den, his fortified office at Vance Properties. The following Thursday, after business hours, I used an old key card that, to my surprise, still granted me access. I told Joe, the night security guard who'd known me since I was a boy playing in the construction trailers, that I needed to collect some of my mother's personal items from my father's office, a story he accepted with a sad, sympathetic nod. My father's corner office was a temple to his own power. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased his dominion over the Seattle skyline, while dark mahogany and chrome furnishings projected an air of unassailable authority. It took me 2 hours of meticulous, nerve-wracking searching, running my hands over every surface before I found it, a nearly invisible seam in the wood paneling behind his massive desk. I pressed it, and a section of the bookshelf swung inward with a soft click, revealing a sleek, modern safe. My mind raced. What was the combination? His birthday? Mine? The company's founding date? In a moment of bitter inspiration, I typed in my parents' wedding anniversary. The safe door opened with a hushed, pneumatic hiss. The contents made my blood run cold. There were stacks of documents from banks in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, detailing assets worth over $50 million. They were perfectly forged, contracts and power of attorney, forms bearing my Mother's expertly copied signature. And at the very back, tucked inside a plain manila folder, was the most horrifying discovery of all, a file on my grandparents. My maternal grandfather had been the original founder of the company, and my father had always seethed with resentment that half of it belonged to my mother, through inheritance. The file contained grainy photographs of my grandparents' car before it was repaired after their fatal accident 20 years ago. Close-ups clearly showed the brake lines had been surgically severed. There were also handwritten notes in my father's unmistakable script with cold, clinical phrases like permanent resolution to inheritance dispute and timeline for asset transfer. I stood there, frozen, the photograph shaking in my hand. This was no longer about infidelity or financial fraud. My father was a murderer. He had killed my grandparents to get their money, and he had been fully prepared to kill my mother to keep it. Working quickly, I used my phone to photograph every single page, every document, every damning note. My hands were so unsteady I had to brace them against the safe door to get clear shots. This was the evidence that could break the case wide open. We took our digital trove to Charlotte Wells, a former federal prosecutor with a reputation for taking on powerful, untouchable men. She reviewed the files on her large monitor, her expression growing graver with each click. After an hour of silent scrutiny, she made 2 phone calls, one to a senior agent at the FBI's Seattle field office, and another to the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. "What your father has built, Elias, isn't a real estate empire," she told us, her voice low and serious. "It's a sophisticated criminal organization that uses property development as its cover. The evidence you've gathered, especially concerning your grandparents, changes everything. This is now a homicide investigation. With the full weight of the federal government behind it, the investigation moved with stunning speed. Within weeks, my father's assets were frozen by court order, his business partners were served with subpoenas. An investigative journalist, tipped off by anonymous leaks, began publishing front-page stories about the Vance Empire, digging up the corruption he had spent a lifetime burying. He returned to Seattle a man transformed. The polished, unflappable facade was gone, replaced by the frantic, cornered energy of a rat. He called me constantly, his voice laced with a new, desperate panic demanding family loyalty, asking if I knew anything about the conspiracy to destroy his good name, trying to manipulate me with reminders that I was a Vance. I agreed to meet him alone at the family mansion, the scene of so many of my mother's fears. The house felt cold and dead. He was pouring a glass of expensive scotch, his hand trembling so violently the bottle neck clinked against the crystal. "They're trying to destroy me, Elias," he slurred, not even looking at me. "They see your mother's death as a weakness, an opening. That's not why they're coming for you." "Dad," I said, my voice calm and steady, belying the storm of emotions inside me. He turned, his eyes bloodshot and narrowed. "What would you know about it?" He sneered. And then my mother stepped out of the shadows of the hallway where she had been waiting, a silent avenger. The crystal tumbler slipped from his grasp, exploding on the marble floor in a shower of glass and amber liquid. For what felt like an eternity, he just stared, his brain struggling to process the impossible. His face cycled through sheer shock, then confusion, and finally a dawning, horrified understanding. "You," he finally whispered, the word a venomous curse. "You did this." "The truth did this, Leonard," my mother replied, her voice resonating with a strength I hadn't heard in years. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "You built this prison for yourself. We're just here to lock the door." On cue, the FBI agents who had been waiting outside moved in. They read him his rights in the foyer of the multi-million-dollar home he had, built with stolen money and the blood of my grandparents. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at me, and in his eyes, I saw not a father but a defeated monster. The trial that followed was a media spectacle that gripped the nation for 8 weeks. My father was convicted on 47 separate counts, including multiple charges of tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, and 2 counts of second-degree murder for the deaths of my grandparents. The judge, condemning his profound and pathological lack of humanity, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the year since the verdict, our family has embarked on the long, difficult, but healing journey of putting our lives back together. My mother now lives in a sun-drenched cottage on Whidbey Island. Surrounded by gardens, she tends herself. She has written a book on native, Pacific, Northwest plants and volunteers at a shelter for women escaping domestic violence, using her own experience to help others find strength. The proceeds from the court-ordered sale of my father's legitimate assets have been donated to charities supporting victims of financial abuse and funding homicide investigations. My relationship with Clara, tested to its absolute limit by the secrets I had to keep, emerged stronger. We entered couples therapy to rebuild our foundation of trust, and Lily now understands in an age-appropriate way that her grandmother is a real-life superhero, one who didn't wear a cape, but who had the courage to fake her own death to protect her family and bring a very bad man to justice. As for me, I have completely refocused my architectural practice. Green Line Designs now primarily works with organizations that build safe houses and transitional housing for women and families escaping dangerous situations. There is a profound healing poetry in using my skills to create spaces where people can finally feel secure, something my own. Mother was denied until she found the incredible courage to take her life back. The story I've shared with you today is about more than just bringing a criminal to justice. It's about the immense courage required to face the unthinkable truth about someone you are supposed to be able to trust implicitly. It's about the resilience of the human spirit to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. My mother's fake death became her path to true freedom, and in saving herself, she ultimately saved our entire family from living forever in the long, dark shadow of my father's corruption. If this story of courage against impossible odds resonated with you, please like this video and follow *** Winds of Thought*** for more real accounts of dark vengeance and ultimate redemption. Your support helps us share these important stories with others who might need to hear them. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappear in order to truly be seen.